Hello, I'm the EDC academic. Thank you for watching. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite sort of non-traditional carry items. And the knife that you see on the cutting board here, this is a Camillus sailor's knife or rigging knife. It goes by either name. And this certainly isn't the kind of knife that most people, think of, or nearly anybody thinks of whenever they're thinking of an EDC item. But it is a knife that sees some rotation in my carry schedule, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, because I like to use my knives. I don't just, collect knives for the purpose of having them sit in a drawer all the time. I like to carry them. I like to use them. And another reason why I like this is because of the heritage and the history that is around this knife and this particular style of knife. And one additional reason why I like to carry knives like this on occasion is because we in the knife community, in the EDC community, we are sort of de facto ambassadors of the hobby. And I'm sure, like myself, you have been in situations where somebody has, asked to borrow a knife, or somebody needed a knife on some occasion and you pull one out of your pocket. And it's just neat every once in a while to pull out a knife like this to hand to somebody because it's a conversation starter. Nobody just takes this knife, uses it, and hands it back to you. There's always a follow-up question. And pulling out a knife like this and handing it to somebody is quite different from pulling out a military three. This is a military two. Excuse me. Quite different from pulling out a military two. This might raise an eyebrow. It has a very tactical appearance to it. It's large, somewhat aggressive looking, and somebody might have a negative reaction to you pulling this out of your pocket and handing it to them. If you pull out this and hand it to them, there's, in my experience, I've never had a negative reaction to it. It's always met with a smile and a follow-up question. What is that? And, what is it used for? And again, it just gives you as the carrier the opportunity to engage somebody in conversation and to act as an ambassador for the hobby and maybe convert somebody into being a knife person. So I'm just going to walk through the knife a little bit. The knife has the classic a sheep's foot blade. Sailor's knives, rigging knives, nearly always have a sheep's foot or a lamb's foot blade, and that's for a couple of reasons. One, the type of cuts that they are doing. The type of cuts they are doing are of a utility nature, and just as on a standard carpenter's knife, on a utility knife, it's just a straight blade with that sort of Warncliffe style tip. That's what sailors, the original sailors on boats, were using them for. This is just a utility knife. And part of the reason for the blunted tip was just a safety precaution, just so you don't accidentally stab something that you're not intending to stab, either yourself, somebody that you're working in close proximity to, or even some of the rigging and the sailing itself, some of the sails themselves. If you're on a boat and the boat's in motion, swaying from side to side, it makes for a precarious work situation, especially whenever you have a sharp implement in your hand. And so the rounded over, tip there, the slightly blunted tip, was a safety feature with the design, with the use case scenarios in mind. People on a boat that is going to be, shifting from side to side, forward and backward. So that is the reason for the sheep's foot. And the sheep's foot, I don't really have a whole lot of dedicated sheep's foot blades, excuse me. If I have a knife that has a sheep's foot blade, it's usually in a Stockman, something like this old timer here. One of the three blades on this Stockman pattern is the sheep's foot blade. And on a knife of this size, it serves the purpose primarily for utility and for whittling, to get in and do some of those, get with that fine point there, do some fine carving work. This knife obviously is not intended for fine carving work, but the general utility of the shape of the blade remains the same. And it's one of those blade shapes that I don't have a lot of, but the ones that I do have, I really appreciate. I'm constantly asking myself, why don't I have more knives that have a sheep's foot or a lamb's foot? Because every time I pull it out and look at it and use it, I enjoy it so much. So there's the blade, and you can see the tank stamp on it. This is an old Camillus. Move it there so you can see the stamp. It's Camillus stainless USA. This is more than likely this from the 1970s, early 1980s. It could be as old as the 1960s. It could be as new as the 1990s. Based on the wear and the condition of the knife, my best guess is that it is mid to late 70s. So there's the main blade. Again, it's the sheep's foot. It has the nail neck there. I never bother with the nail neck. I just pinch grip it and open it up that way. It has a very aggressively strong back spring to it, and so I usually when I'm whenever I'm closing slip joint knives, I prefer to sort of pinch the handle there and then bring the blade down on my hand. And the strength of this spring is such that it is a little bit difficult, especially if your hands are a little bit slippery. And so sometimes whenever I'm closing this, I do have to get my fingers in the path of the blade, which if you're careful, it's not necessarily dangerous to do that, but I like to get in the practice of, stay in the practice rather of keeping my fingers clear from the path of the blade, because it does have a very positive, very strong positive retention there on that back spring. And the main sort of visual feature of this knife is the marlin spike. And for non-knife people, they're not going to know what a marlin spike is. They're going to look at that and be completely unfamiliar with what the intended application of that is. It's just going to look odd to them. It's going to look like some sort of weird little tooth, and they're not going to know what the application is. But as soon as you indicate that it is a sailor's knife, it is a rigging knife, it starts to snap into focus a little bit for most people. So the purpose of the marlin spike is obviously to loosen knots in ropes and rigging. And this has a very large, marlin spike there that is designed for that purpose. And in all honesty, in an EDC capacity, this does not see a lot of use. This is just something that I like having with me. Now, that being said, I have used it. I have used this in my personal use case scenario. I do a lot of paracord applications. I make a lot of lanyards, I make a lot of knots, and so for some of the knots that I make, a marlin spike such as this is quite handy for the purpose of keeping the center of the knot open while you're doing some of those more complex knots. And then of course it is also helpful for undoing the knots if you need to redo something. So there is the marlin spike. And another use case scenario that I've used this for, I have used this in gardening applications. I've used this to poke holes to plant seeds. I have used this in camping situations that primarily consisted in using it to scrape big hunks of mud or pieces of gravel that were stuck in the soles of my boots. And so it does have some applications beyond what its intended application of untying rope. So you'll have to use your imagination there. But again, for my urban EDC applications, I haven't used it for its intended function in an everyday capacity in some time. But the spike there has that same aggressively tensioned spring on it, which you just heard with that snap. And ouch, I just snapped my own thumb there. So it has this clasp here, and the clasp doubles as the unlocking mechanism for the marlin spike. The blade does not have a lock. The blade is just a traditional slip joint. The marlin spike has the lock, and to undo the lock, you'll simply take the clasp and you'll apply pressure on it, and it pulls. It's got that little pivot point there, and as you pull backwards on it, it lifts up that back spring. And then once the back spring is lifted up, you can position the marlin spike forward and begin to rotate it back into the channel of the knife. And once again, you hear that very aggressive snap that is on there because of that very powerful back spring. And this is just I think this is a beautiful knife. It's got nickel silver bolsters on it. It's, you know, stainless construction. The earlier ones were carbon steel, obviously. I like the hasp on there, and this is just a beautiful knife to have in your pocket. It's heavy. It's a bit of a commitment. It weighs about an ounce more than the Buck 112, the sport model, and it weighs about an ounce more than the Spyderco Military 2. So it is a little bit of a commitment there. You can see how the size comparison. This from bolster to bolster is about 4.5 inches. The Camillus sailor's knife, the Buck 112, is about 4.25 inches, and so this is about 1/4 inch shorter in length than the Camillus sailor's knife, rigging knife, and you can see that it is quite a bit shorter in length than the Spyderco Military. The advantages to carrying this, as I've already said, it's unassuming. For as large as it is, nobody is going to freak out whenever you pull this out of your pocket. Again, this is never met with suspicion. This is never met with, you know, people, you know, wondering, you know, why do you have that size of a knife on you, right? Which is something like the Spyderco. People are going to wonder why you're walking around with this, you know, a knife that they deem to be tactical and offensive in some capacity. This doesn't have that. This is very clearly a work knife. This is very clearly a vintage knife. In my experience in handing this to people and pulling this out and using it for some application, as I said, it's always ever been a positive reception. And this is a user for me. Like I've already mentioned, I do maintain a working edge on this knife. I don't keep it a very refined edge because it's not the kind of cutting that I do with this knife. But oh, you got a little bit of a burr there. But for the type of cutting that I do on a day-to-day basis, it serves me just fine. And the only thing that I do to maintain the blade is about, you know, once a week or so, I'll put it to a strop, use a honing rod, and just put it back in the drawer until the next time it is in my pocket. So my question for those of you that have stuck with me thus far in the video is, what kind of knives make it into your rotation that you would consider to be a non-traditional carry item? This is one of my favorites to carry around with me, and again, I think it can help you in your role as an ambassador of the hobby, start a conversation, get somebody interested in knives. So what are you carrying that serves in that capacity? And with those things being said, I think I'm going to be bringing this video to a close. I'm going to thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.